The Great Red Dragon. Hilton Hatima. Chapter 11. The Degenerate Woman. Modern man and woman are both degenerates, but the fact that woman is still fruitful while man is sterile, is conclusive evidence of greater degeneration in the male organism. Were it not for woman's productive capacity, the race would end with the end of the present generation. The capacity of creation is lost in organisms most seriously deteriorated. Man is degenerated to such extent that his organs of fecundity are atrophied and functionless. His mammary glands, as we have seen, may occasionally develop to an active stage, but his fructiferous glands are unable to engender the child that he might be able to suckle at breast. The total extent of his fructiferous capacity is that of the very minor aid which he can render woman in the function of fertilization. Take from him this minor function, and he becomes a useless figure. The sexes do not form two distinctive groups. They shade gradually into each other, both psychically and physically, like daylight to darkness, with the heterosexual woman at one extreme, and the heterosexual man at the other. But it is absurd to assert that this development of man arose as a mere afterthought of nature, who apparently forgets to complete her work, like a thoughtless child. The only logical conclusion to be derived from the facts presented is that man is a degenerate woman. For 1. Woman appeared first, and 2. Man evolved from woman under the law of devolution. We assert, and we believe, that the supreme principle of creation not only is, but that it is a self-generating unit. Therefore, the first forms engendered by the creative principle would necessarily and lawfully be self-generating units. For under the law of heredity, it would be impossible for the creative principle to produce a barren sterile organism, nor was a sterile organism ever produced until that condition was caused by degeneration. The same law that rules the principle of creation reaches down and governs every living organism. Under the law of heredity, woman, a normal, fruitful female, cannot produce nor reproduce any type other than her kind. Under the law of like begets like, woman, who has produced all humanity and still produces all humanity, cannot give birth to a distinct type, a sterile creature, such as man. Life begins with the female, fruitful, organism and is carried on for a long distance by means of the female alone ward. Page 313. Here we come face to face with a long-forgotten truth, says Swinney, who adds, the first male, the first son of the mother, was ever virgin born. Page 11. Man has always been born of woman. She is still his mother, and he is still her son. Under the law of heredity he bears in his body, and will always bear in his body, certain anatomical marks and certain psychical manifestations as evidence to prove that he is born of woman. Because of the newness of the thought presented, it may be difficult for the student to grasp the deep significance of these statements. But as a matter of fact and of law, we behold, no doubt with some surprises, that the male is only a secondary female, a degenerate, sterile, barren, unproductive female. Swinney, page 12. Swinney writes, if the female sex is the reproductive, the fertile sex, the fertilizer, is also female, but a differentiated, incomplete female organism, undeveloped in the distinctive creative organs and functions of the female. Thus there is only one sex, the female. Mystery of the Circle. Page 28. Wiesmann, in the germplasm, recognized the basic unity of the sex by the implied deduction that the male is but a disintegrated part of the female, while Ward points out the obvious fact that the mother forms the son, the male in most organisms gradually assuming more importance and ultimately approaching the size and general nature of the female, due alone to the fact that woman had been abused, enslaved, and treated as an inferior for so many ages. Croth Ward asserted, the idea that the female is naturally and really the superior sex seems incredible, and only the most liberal and emancipated minds, possessed of a large store of biological information, are capable of realizing it. That which might naturally surprise the philosophical observer is not that the female is usually superior to the male, but that the male should have advanced at all beyond its primal estate as either a fertilizing organ attached to the female, or, at most, a minute organism detached from her but devoted exclusively to the same purpose. In other words, while female superiority is a perfectly natural condition, male development requires explanation. Pure sociology. but modern science has made no logical effort to explain the male development. It had been left for us to perform this task, a task which modern science rejects because a logical explanation of male development upsets the scientific theory of evolution. The process of creation operates according to fixed law, but when the process is obstructed by any cause, its work will be faulty, and the organism will fail to produce its kind absolutely. The resemblance will be relative only, and the offspring appears as a new type. The product of faulty function should be what we would reasonably expect. It would be an abnormal, deformed, malformed creature possessing the female elements in a rudimentary state, while the male elements would appear in a hypertrophied state. This would be a decline of the fruitful organs in the direction of barrenness, a positive indication of degeneration. In conditions of decay, the higher, formative, productive qualities suffer first and most. Fruitful mothers are healthy mothers. Diseased women are barren or partially so, depending upon the degree of their decadence. Their sterility is the surest sign of their degeneracy. Their creative organs are atrophied. The elements the nutrition not needed nor used by the atrophied female elements. For this reason we find maleness appearing in women as they advance in age and their formative organs atrophy. This briefly describes why present men and women appear as the two unbalanced and undeveloped halves of a former balanced, developed, self-generating unit. In the course of time all knowledge of the previous condition of bisexualism would be lost and forgotten, and the unbalanced organism, called male and female, would become a racial characteristic, and be regarded as normal structures. This statement agrees with the law of modification, that when any deviation of structure of constitution appears in the parent, as the result of degenerative influences or other causes, it is transmitted to the offspring in an augmented degree. Darwin. Under this law, a time would eventually come when the modified creative would assume such a marked variation from the original type, that it would be considered a new variety, as Darwin says. But under the law of heredity, this modified creature, which we now call man, could be nothing more or less than a woman, presenting supernormal male qualities and infranormal female qualities. To be more exact, this modified creature would be nothing more or less than a degenerate woman. Under the law of atavism, there would be occasional returns toward the more original type through partly modified descendants, such, for instance, as those queer creatures called hermaphrodites, who are such a mystery to science but not to student of nature. In these peculiar persons we behold physical evidence of the efforts of the creative principles attempt to revive, restore, and resurrect that which has been. Atavistical reversion may reach back to the very beginning of humanity, and some qualities of the first great mother may appear in the child of today. It is another law of nature that hermaphrodites could never be, had not the original type of humanity possessed in one supreme body the dual elements of creation. Nothing can be that never was, and anything that has been can never entirely disappear. In attempting to account for the appearance of man, Clement Wood observes, the adult male represents a reversion to an inferior early type, which in man means a more bestial type evolution of sex. Page 9. Wood, consistent with the theory of evolution, has exactly reversed the order of development, and indirectly admits it by asserting that long after the female had been race itself, the male developed. Ibid. The evolutionist must constantly contradict himself to support his theory. He fails to account for the appearance of woman, but asserts that she came first, and that man descended from woman by the process of the Immaculate Conception and the virgin birth. Then Wood says that man represents a reversion to an inferior early type, a more bestial type, such as the ape, for instance, from which man ascended, we assume. How can this opinion be true, if woman appeared on earth first, and man descended from her? If man descended from woman, as science asserts, he did not ascend from an ape. If man is an inferior type, as compared to woman, the inferiority arises from degeneration, and not from reversion. When man reverts toward the type of his ancestry, he does not become an ape. He develops his dormant and rudimentary female qualities, and becomes a hermaphrodite. This is atavistical reversion. This fact of observation is more proof of the correctness of our philosophy of devolution, and more proof of the erroneousness of the theory of evolution. Equally as important, this fact of observation shows that to reach the higher life, man must first rise above the law of sexuality. He must revert to a woman and then revert to a god by the development of the dual elements of creation. This is regeneration, and this is the only plan of salvation, says Dr. Raleigh, page 109. These are the stages through which man has passed in his descent. Versing the process, can man ascend to the higher life from which he has fallen under the force of the law of devolution? Our doctrine is the lesser from the greater, the lower from the higher, man from woman, and woman from a god. If present man represents an improved age, why has he stopped short in his ascending progress? If man came up from nothing, then he was within himself the power to develop into the infinite by virtue of the force of evolution.